data itself is a product. It is not an outcome of a shipment that we put in the system or a byproduct of what we do. Like, you have to treat your data the same way as you treat your operating system. Like, you have to maintain it. You have to put upgrades in. You have to continue to make it better.
Welcome to Deliver, the last mile performance podcast, where we explore what it takes to operate, scale, and differentiate in today's market. I'm your host, Bloch, and I'm the CEO at Bringg.
And I'm Raquel Zanoni. Together, Guy and I chat with some of today's most knowledgeable retail and logistics leaders to discuss the last mile, specifically how it's evolving and what success looks like.
Today's guest is Jamie Andrade, Senior VP of Product Management at SEKO Logistics. Jamie spent nearly a decade leading operations team before moving into product and technology leadership. She has a rare dual lens because she's familiar with the execution on the ground, but also scalable system design in the office. Today, she's focused on driving SEKO's integration, data, and AI project across its last mile and across border operations. Raquel, what stood out most to you from the conversation?
I think for me, it was the gap between what customers expect from their LSP and then what most LSPs can actually deliver. And that gap isn't ever really a capability problem. So you have the technology and you have the operations, but then it's the thing connecting the two that tends to be the problem. It's data and integration. So until you can actually solve for that, nothing else is going to move the needle. What about you, Guy?
What stood out to me was Jamie's point that AI cannot close that gap for you. Every topic we covered, whether it was scalability, integration, or AI implementation, kept coming back to the same thing. Get your data foundation right first, or you are blind on the sand. But let's not wait any longer. Here is the full conversation, and don't forget to subscribe to hear future episodes. Let's go. Welcome to Deliver, Jamie, the last mile performance podcast where we peel back the onion on every dimension of what's becoming a growth engine for retailers and logistic companies. For those who don't know you, or at least not yet, you're a Senior Vice President of Product Management at SEKO Logistics and a Senior Technology Product Leader with over 20 years of experience spanning logistics operations and enterprise technology. After nearly a decade leading operations teams, you actually moved into product and technology leadership, which gave you a dual lens grounded in real-world execution and scalable design. Today, you focus on driving integration, data, AI-led initiatives that simplify complexity, improve visibility, and enable SEKO to scale last mile and cross-border operations while keeping the end-user experience front and center. So Jamie, my first question to you is that you spent nearly a decade leading operations team before moving into senior product and technology leadership. What pushed you to make that shift? And how does that dual background shape how you think about last mile challenges today?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I didn't really leave operations. I just moved a little bit upstream. So when I was in ops and leading teams, I was always the one that was asking the tech guys, like, why can't the system do this? There has to be an automated way to do this. There has to be easier ways to do this. And as an operator, I was really into the system side, and I ended up going to a user conference for the software that we used, met a gentleman who struck up a conversation, convinced me to move to the tech side and help him launch a new system from the view of the operator. And I've kind of kept that at the forefront of how I think about how technology enables our business. And honestly, it's fun to get to solve problems through that lens after working at the desk level. And, I think a lot of people that come from the tech side and lead product and haven't walked a mile in the shoes of the people that they're delivering to. They start with the features. Like for me, I look at what are the operators doing? Where are they rekeying stuff? Where is their process breaking down? Where is it hard for them to get through a task? And then that tends to kind of lead, the way that we design the product, because last mile, like operationally can be complicated, but our guys know what they're doing. Like the pain points are usually driven by some limitation of the tech or the data, right? So that's where we're at.
Here we go. And we're going to dive deep into different areas just in this answer. But I think we will agree that LSPs today are caught between forces that they cannot fully control, like fuel volatility, not in your control, labor shortages, not in your control. And it's all while customer expectations keep climbing regardless. The ones pulling ahead are not just absorbing these pressures, right? They are rethinking how they operate in response. So, what examples do you have on how microeconomics pressure change how LSPs think about their last mile strategy?
Yeah, I think first and foremost to comment on like the volatility, the labor issues, things like that. Like it's been a few years. Like we've had to really pivot. And I think what we're seeing is you can't just have like a fixed network anymore and do things the way we've always done things and have certain carriers for a lane, right? Everything is driving towards dynamic flexibility. The competition is fierce out there. We are all like chasing very thin margins, and the way that you run your operations and the way that tech enables that, like, and then you're adding the fact that the clients have very little tolerance for anything that is inefficient or unstable, because it then impacts their bottom line downstream. You've got to have tech that enables you to be proactive and enables you to manage by exceptions, not manage every single step of the process. So we're seeing a lot more around automation, dynamic routing, flexibility. Like that's not like setting people apart anymore. Like that is your survival skill. You have to be able to do that to remain competitive.
I think that's really interesting. You mentioned differentiation a little bit. I'd like to hear a bit more about when you're thinking of like tech enabled, um, facing some of these pressures with the technology. Are you thinking of it more in terms of how can we reduce our costs? Or are you thinking of it more as how can we differentiate to maybe capture more of this market and to sell more volume to our customers? What those are sort of the two lanes. Where do you see yourself fitting in?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance, right? So there's this component of it where the customers want everything like better, faster, cheaper, and they want more visibility, but they don't want to pay more. So there's a balance between like having this transparency and reliable data and being able to really become a partner in our customers' supply chains. Like they have to understand the delivery window. They have to understand that with everything going on, like we're not going to be on time all the time. There are capacity constraints. Like we just have to be able to provide them real time status. Like well, everybody's moving the same lanes. Everybody can put freight in a truck and get it from point A to point B. And your customers are going to stay with you if you are able to tell them in real time what's happening versus, the delivery is missed and they're calling you asking where your trucker is, right? They need access to it. They typically don't want to log into your portal to get it. So integration into their systems and really just being able to control the movement for them and give them very proactive monitoring. It's You have to put some cost in to get yourself to a point to be able to do that, but as a long-term fix, like that limits our labor to do exception management. It limits things for our customer can then manage on their side, so they're not having to like repurpose labor in their warehouse to unload that truck. Like it's all cost containment, but you have to invest to get to a point where that stuff is not a blocker or an afterthought.
So you would agree that there's probably things that are very much table stakes then as far as customer experience and routing. Um, Can you unravel that a little bit? Like, what are the things that you think for LSPs, especially today, would be considered table stakes for the customer?
Yeah, I mean, in our day-to-day lives, right? Like, you order off of Amazon, you click a button, you can see where the truck is delivering to your house, how many stops away you are. You have like that experience is so embedded in our lives that people expect it of every vendor that they interact with, right? Like everybody compares to that kind of Amazon level visibility and reliability. Like you that little Prime checkbox, like I order stuff and it's at my house the same afternoon, right? Like that's just how everybody lives, and especially just the next generation of supply chain leaders that are coming up at our customers, they grew up with that as an expectation. So you have to be able to weave that experience across all of your tech and every interaction you have with them, regardless of which of your offices or stations they're interacting with, which of your trucker partners are supporting that move. It's across the board. Like the gap isn't in the execution, it's in the consistency of the data that you're getting and the experience that you're delivering to your customer.
Interesting, because when I think about where you stand at the market you see around you, and I look at the customer expectations and how they're just growing day by day, week by week, I wonder what's the biggest gap that you see today between what customers expect and what LSPs are positioned or set to deliver.
I think the biggest gap really is around the data to deliver that experience, right? So if you think of all of the people that interact with a single move from point A to point B, right? You've got potentially a first and final mile carrier. You've got potentially a line haul. If it's crossing borders, there's a customs component. Maybe there's a warehouse in there that's doing some receiving. Like it's not just put it on a truck and it's going direct from point A to point B, right? So all of those people have information about that shipment and data points and milestones and things that feed that visibility that it's my job to deliver to my client as a one concise message, right? So I've got to take people who are all at different levels of their maturity, understand what data they can give to me and when, put it in a singular format that makes sense to my customers, that every, a delivery is a delivery, no matter what event code these 7 different people send me, right? And I have to do that across lanes, across regions, across carriers. So really it's understanding that the data is the most important part of this and how I can get it and how quickly I can get it, and then making it with, again, a single lens to our customer, because they don't care about all of that. That's my job to solve for them.
As we speak about it, then I'm looking at technology integration and how we scale last mile. And you mentioned different data points that probably live in different systems, which means integration is one of those challenges that every LSP faces, but only few manage to actually solve it. And as delivery network grows and it's more fragmented, spanning multiple partners, regions, and fulfillment models, the technology that connects them often cannot keep pace. And I wonder, from you leading product and technology teams, why integration is such a persistent challenge for LSPs, especially across partners, regions, and delivery models. What makes it so hard to figure out?
So the data first and foremost, because you're going to get it in a different format from every single person. And I always laugh because like we have standard APIs, you guys have standard APIs, right? But the customer doesn't want to work with your APIs. They want you to connect to their format. So we invested a long time ago in having an in-house integration team to build those branches to us. And we also don't want our customers to have to build multiple pipes depending on what service they're handling with us, right? It's one SEKO. So we have developed an integration hub that we call One Hub that centralizes all of our tech. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, what service, international, domestic, cross-border, warehouse, you send us one message, we hit it to all the systems. But that's not it's not an easy thing to get to because you have to start with defining every single piece, like what is a shipment and what does that look like in all of the systems, and what are my event codes that I want to have as standardized, because every carrier is going to have different ones, and really taking the time to like build that out and then build a framework where I can receive an EDI, you can send me an FTP, you can send me an API, you have to have the flexibility to connect to anything and make it really simple for the customer. And that's where, we try to be very easy to work with and meet the customer where they are in terms of their tech. But customer side is one thing, and then you have all the vendors that you have to connect to, and that's why that standardization is so important.
Maybe you can give us a story of an integration project that you've taken on, a particularly large one that was successful, but describe or walk us through what that looked like, some of the challenges you all faced, and ultimately how you overcame those.
Yeah,
Raquel loves stories.
I
So
love a story. I'm an
she loves
example
it.
person. I need to like visualize in my head what's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly, right, we're a Bringg customer, which is why I'm here. But I think that integration was really, it was one of the bigger ones that we've done here, and I think it ticks a lot of those boxes, right? So we're talking about, in our US operation, 30 plus sites. They're a mix of corporate owned stations, strategic partners, which is what we call our franchise offices, a mix of sites that maybe had their own assets, some were asset light, some were just using, local cartage companies and brokers. And so you're trying to put a technology that's going to enable them to better support their last mile network, but you probably have within that like ecosystem 12, 15 different versions of how they operate. So back to kind of like how I drove into the tech side to begin with, like it has to start with the operational process and what you want the outcome to be. So what is this tech going to enable for us? What decisions do we need to make? What updates need to be sent and where? And you can't start with, oh, well, here's, bring in SEKO's APIs. Let's talk about how it works. It's what is happening at the operations level across all these sites? What is the same and can we standardize? And then what do we want to add to that to give the customer experience that we want? And then what are local things that we need to be able to account for outside of that to be able to let these different models of business run basically using a cookie cutter thing. So we spent a lot of time upfront defining like the operational process and then backed into how that, like, I like to have a very nice little workflow and then say, okay, when this operator hits this button, I need to fire off a thing, and that thing needs to trigger this thing in this other system. Like that's how we build it, because then, we're able to, I think we scaled like relatively quickly, a couple of sites a week as we started deploying this, versus like other people that kind of start at the other side where let's just get one pilot site live and learn from it. Then, maybe you get site one live and then site two has a thing that you have to now account for. So you have to re-architect. And then cool, you're on the third site and the fourth site has this other thing. Like then you're just forever developing versus like really taking that time up front and understanding, what is working at the ground level and how do we want it to flow. So I'm always going to start at the user level.
Jamie, many leaders talk about positioning their teams and their technology, those that they use, of course, for scale. Can you share an example of a scalable last mile technology that actually looks like in practice for an LSP, of course?
Yeah, to me, scalable means reusable, right? So I know I'm harping a little bit on the standards, standard events, standard data, but our One Hub platform, we'll give an example of that. We, modernized our architecture to be able to have kind of this standard and really drive configuration versus custom code. I don't want to build to a different set. I don't want to have a list of my codes and your codes and point them to each other every time I'm doing an integration. So we try to put a lot of that power back into our operations teams, our account managers, the people that are dealing with these carriers on a day-to-day basis. So within our integration portal, our teams have the ability to they can edit messages, they can resend, and they can edit and manage the mappings. So if they have a customer that maybe now that client wants a different event, or I don't know, like my head is going to the international side. I know this is a domestic podcast, but with like the stuff that's going on in the Middle East right now, maybe they want an event if their shipment was delayed because of that reason. Like they can go in and create an event and map it automatically right in there. So it doesn't become a very development heavy thing. And back to my comment about, rolling out, kind of a standard flow that has some configuration per site for when we deployed Bringg initially, like we don't want this to be a consistent, like technical heavy solution where every time we want to enable something for the business, it has to put in a ticket and go back through our dev team and people have to wait a bunch of weeks, right? Like, so scalability is, architect it the right way from the start that allows for your business to have some flexibility, because it does. So why would you build anything that doesn't have flexibility in the solution?
I think you're actually hitting on something that's so important, but I don't think a lot of technology leaders or operations leaders at other LSPs really think about, which is that you mentioned reusability. We sometimes talk about standardization. Oftentimes what we see from our side is we have customers or prospects who come in and they're like, we have all of these special workflows, we need to accommodate for all of them, but they're not necessarily thinking big picture of just what it means to scale technology or to reuse technology. And this becomes a huge factor in the build versus buy conversation. How did you get on the other side of this? Like, what was the thing that clicked in your brain where you're like, yeah, we don't need to have a million special workflows. Like this is where we can be
We
flexible.
worked
This
the
is
desk, and then we got a new customer, and here's the SOP that you have to do these 10 things different than you do for all of your other customers. And then we sold this other client, and they have a different thing, but it's all flavors of the same thing. Like, to me, it's just, I can't with like inefficiency, like in my own life and in a process, like it just, you have, and I don't want to do the work. I don't want my dev teams to have to keep redoing this stuff. And as an operator, I'm like, I swear that the tech people, when I was in operations, I was like the squeaky wheel. I'm like, there has to be a better way to do this, because if I just have the tool, I don't need to bug you, because at the end of the day, my goal is just to move my freight, like do what I need to do in like the easiest way possible. So anytime I'm like doing something in my head, God, this just seems like this should not be the way I have to do this. Like, it's like filing your taxes. Like, have we not got a better way to do this by now? Like,
I can feel the pain from here. I can feel it. And I think AI is coming to help us. And AI is a dominant talking point in logistics right now. We all talk about it. But there is a gap between AI conversations and AI results that still remained wide for LSPs. It's still not there. I'm interested, especially from your position and from the pain you just shared with us. How do you see AI driving business performance in the last mile in the coming years?
so I think the people that are finding success with it, again, like, I don't mean to keep going back to this theme, but like, we tend to, you've got to start with what are my problems, because if you've gone to any sort of industry trade show, like it's really shifted where it's like everybody's got AI, everybody's got a solution they want to sell you, it does a thing, but we're trying to be really careful on the SEKO side of like, we don't want 10 tools to do 10 things. We want a tool, again, that's flexible, that is not a heavy admin for me, that is something that I can embed and meet my operators where they are, because we know if we're like, hey, here's this cool new tool you have to log in to, right? Like, we're going to lose people immediately. So how do we embed this into where the operational execution is actually happening? And then where is it impactful to actually see results from that? Like if I save you, Guy, 5 minutes of your day by automating a task, are you going to give me 5 more minutes of work? No, you're going to go get a cup of coffee. Like, so looking at, from the internal side, where can I automate some of those things where there's challenges so that my people, maybe they're not going to be able to, have a bunch more free time throughout their day, but maybe they can handle 10 more files in a day than they could have before. And from the customer side, how do I take all of those, like, how do I pick the data out of my operational process to do things like predictive analytics and route optimization and telling my operations teams, here's the 5 biggest things in your day that you need to look at right now. So it's definitely looking at the operational level versus going to buy some like pie in the sky tool out here that is going to automate your quoting and get quotes back to your customer in 30 seconds. But like 90% of the people that are in our industry right now, their data and their customer master data and their margins, like they don't have that all tied up in a little box with a bow on it that you can put that type of tool on top of to actually get the impact. So while it's not super sexy, like starting at automated exception management or something along those lines is like where you're going to get a lot of impact right now.
So Jamie, you just shared with us the pain of all the configuration, everything that needs to come in place to perfect your operations. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking AI. This is the premise of AI, and that's what AI is coming to help us with. And we know that these days everyone talks about AI. It's just a dominant talking point in every conference, in every webinar, in every article we hear, but we read. But the gap between AI conversations and then AI results is just remains wide for most LSPs. And I wonder, from where you stand as a technology and product leader, how do you see AI driving business performance in the last mile?
Yeah, I think where most people tend to go wrong is they let a vendor tell them what problem they need to solve versus looking internally and understanding where there's an area of opportunity. And that's a really dangerous road to go down because that vendor may only be able to solve 1 or 2 of those problems versus if you actually take a step back and understand where there's bottlenecks in your process, where there's things that you think AI can add value both internally and to your customer, right? Then you're armed with, I need these 10 things, or, to the build versus buy conversation, like you've got to understand where the opportunities are before you go and find a solution. And I think a lot of people go to these shows and they see everybody with a fancy tool. And the reality is most people aren't ready for anything like that at scale. Like the applications, I probably saw 10 of them at Manifest where we can automate your quoting. It'll be 30 seconds from when you get the email to when we, because it's all about speed. But if you think about where the data comes from to feed your rate management system, like you might have your line haul rate here and your pickup is your own agent and it's on a spreadsheet somewhere in a shared drive. Like, how do you put all of that together? How do you understand your customer volumes, how much margin you want to put on that? What is your customer? Like, what is their org code? And how do you trace that through the systems? And how do you get this application to understand like the complexity of your business? Like not everybody's got one operating system or one tool, right? Just between like your operating system and your CRM, getting that to drive that, like nobody's got their data so clean in a little box with a bow that a lot of the tools out there are even going to give them the scale and the output. And I think that's where the industry's gone a little backwards, is there's all this pressure from the senior level to go and do something with AI and do something with automation. And so people subscribe to these tools and they're like, I'm not getting the value. Well, because you didn't start with what is the problem, right? Like, what am I trying to solve? What's going to help my business? So, and you take, the way that we're looking at it is, again, what are the pain points for my operators? Like, how do I arm them with data that's going to predict delays, right? Like, there's a strike or there's bad weather here, like here's the shipments that could be impacted, and then expose that, like they need to be looking at those, but we also need to maybe put a soft alert out to our clients so they know there might be an impact, but we're on it and we're working on it together, right? Like that, all of the predictions, optimizing routings, like the not so sexy stuff that you're going to see at a trade show on a keynote stage, right? Like that's where the value is for now. And you know what I get in doing that? Like I continue to build my standard data set to the point when I am ready for something that is a little bigger, better, next level, like I'm ready then.
Jamie, you don't have to reveal any company secrets by any means, but I'm curious if there are AI projects that you have recently led or implemented. And again, you don't have to necessarily go into all the details, but I would love to hear more about the problem solving process, how that started and how that led to you then saying, I think AI might be the right fit here, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and first, like a little bit of a differentiator, like everybody kind of buckets AI in with automation, but they're really two different things. And what we found is a lot of the things that are happening at our desk level, and that's, when you're talking, we talked a little earlier about like cost being a factor, right? Your biggest cost is your labor to drive your operation, right? So how do we make that more efficient? And again, it's not about taking headcount out of the business. It's about how do we grow and scale without having to incrementally continue to add these heads, right? So what can I do to make my operations very streamlined? So we started looking at, what are we doing today that we've put solutions out, which are usually like, low cost labor to solve these very manual tasks. And then some of it, you can just build a logic app to automate it, right? Or schedule a report to an FTP. Like not everything has to be sexy and AI in order for you to take some efficiency or take some manual work out of the business, right? So we sort of started there with like, where are there areas of opportunity, and then where can we add something that's a little more impactful? And we actually are about to deploy a tool that I'm super excited about. And again, I've said it a couple of times, like you've got to meet your users where you are. And this is where I've struggled a lot with the do I buy, do I build? So we actually developed a tool that lives in our users' Outlook. So it ticks all of the data security privacy boxes that we haven't even talked about when you start talking about implementing AI within your organization. Like, how are they using your data? How are they processing it? Do your customers allow you to process their data? And so we know that's a challenge with going with a bigger tool. So we're like, let's look at what we can do today and solve within, an ecosystem that we know is safe and secure. So you talk about our users live in their email. So much of what we operationally execute on is initiated by an email from a customer, an email from a carrier, whatever, right? So think about a POD. I get a POD delivered this day, this time, signed for by this person. Here's a copy of your POD. Okay, cool. I have to copy and paste the shipment number. I've got to go into my operating system, open up that job, click probably 7 tabs, find the delivery box, put the date, time, name, drag my document over, tell it it's a POD. We now have that integrated where there's an AI layer that will scan the email, understand the job number, and look it up in our system. And it pulls up a little sidebar that says, this looks like a POD, guy. Can you put, like, it looks like it delivered at 4:30 and was signed for by Raquel. And is this your POD document? Yes, it is. And goes into the operating system. So again, like, not anything incredibly wild and crazy, but think of like the amount of time that you're taking out from like swivel chairing, data entry errors, like things like that. And there's a bunch of services in there. That's just one of the examples, but where can we meet our users where they are and make their lives a little easier, and then start to build from there into kind of a wider spread, the nitty gritty stuff, the rates, all of that.
In the end of the day, and I think as you went through just this example, I'm sure that in the bottom of that, eventually it was a conversation that became a data conversation, right? And what we see is that most retailers and LSP, they can see that the quality of their data determines how effective is their AI, especially their AI investments. But better data or better quality of data is such a vague term. And I wonder, when LSPs talk about needing better data, what does that actually mean in practice? Is it an entirely quality problem, or maybe a sharing problem, or is it something else altogether?
So I actually love this topic. We've spent probably the last 5 or 6 years like re-educating the organization here at SEKO that data itself is a product. It is not an outcome of a shipment that we put in the system or a byproduct of what we do. Like, you have to treat your data the same way as you treat your operating system. Like, you have to maintain it. You have to put upgrades in. You have to continue to make it better. Like, we started that journey, like, again, big theme, like, you've got to go back to the basics. So like, when we're saying, I'm talking internal data and then we'll talk like external data quickly, but we started with like, what does the business care about? And if that happened to be, as an example, like, we want to know how much volume our customers are moving and what their revenue and GP is. It's a pretty basic ask, right? But like, what's a customer? Like, how do we trace that customer from our CRM to our operating system to our client portal? Because all of those systems that your customer lives in have different codes, different data structures. Okay, so we've defined this now. And what if they have like 3 divisions, but they all want visibility at a master level? So then we had to build, that hierarchy and really rebuilding like a dictionary of what these terms are to your business. Build the data model like correct from the first brick, and then everything else becomes easy. So we've really tried to approach everything that way. And then we hold our vendors to the same standards. Like, when we're ingesting data from them, we're putting it into our data model so that everything that we add to our ecosystem is just feeding this analytics platform that we've built around how we've defined the data. That's not easy, and it's not fun, and it is not sexy, but you will never be successful if you don't do that first, right? Now, once you do that, we're at the point now where we're starting to look at like, how do we tap into the unstructured data? And this is where, when people say they need better data, a lot of it comes from, at least in my head, because I've got everything that I can get from my operating systems now. How do I get beyond that? How do I know that I had a customer that sent an email with a negative tone because they had 3 service delays? And how do I get that data out of my email or out of, maybe it was a phone call, maybe it was a social media post? Like, how do I surface that and start to make those become data points into my model so I can see when my customers are at risk? Like, if you're dealing with a local station, you had 2 service failures, but in the last 90 days you've had none. Like, to have an account manager pick up the phone and say, hey, I noticed there were 2 missed deliveries. Like, I just want to reach out. Like, who's doing that today? Like, that's where the better data and the power of that data starts to come into play. So that's what we're kind of, our next evolution of it is really looking at, how do we have our hands on all this data, but it's in emails and it's in, like, how do you get that? So that's kind of our next phase.
That's really interesting. I've actually never really thought about that before, the unstructured piece. We talk a lot about these indicators for customer satisfaction. Obviously, you can ask them, you can get some sort of satisfaction score from the delivery. They may or may not open that email, and they may or may not do anything with that information. You also have like on-time rate. Those are all indicators of your customers being happy or not. Can you talk a little bit more about the KPIs that you think matter most for measuring the customer experience, and maybe go a little bit further into this unstructured data piece, sort of pie in the sky? If you could have it tomorrow, what would it look like?
Oh, I wish I could have it tomorrow. No, I think internally and externally, there's a lot of crossover on what's important, right? Like, are we delivering on time? And that's, from our customer point of view, are we delivering for them? Are our truckers, carriers, partners delivering on time for us? How often are we successful on that first delivery attempt? How efficient, more internally, how efficient are our routes and our capacity and our cost per mile? Like all of those things are pretty basic at this point. But then, with our exceptions, that's where some of this unstructured stuff becomes interesting, because we can surface the exceptions from within the application, but how quickly are we resolving them? Like if it's resolved in an email, how do I, and we're not doing this today, this is my pie in the sky, like how do I close that loop that exception is done, and am I doing the same process to eliminate that exception? Like, because that's when, hey, guess what? I can probably put some AI decision-making logic around there to just eliminate that from even being an exception. And that's where I think really the future is going. From the customer side, it's not just about like clean tracking pages, performance, like all of that matters, but being able to provide like another layer of context. So if we're delivering on time 98% of the time, like what is that 2%, like by trade lane, and where is it happening? Like, is it a consistent issue at the supplier for pickup? Is it a consistent issue at like a border crossing point, or like on a certain route, there's something that's happening, and being able to kind of surface that to them so we can say, hey, we can probably optimize that lane for you because we've noticed this thing happens a lot. That's where you start to become like a real partner in their network. And, back to like the cost piece, those are the value adds that matter, right? Like you've got your real-time data. Now I'm telling you like more proactively and a layer down, like, hey, maybe you need a different customs broker, or maybe we need to look at, routing via this hub versus that one because we're consistently seeing delays there. Like that's, I think, where this stuff starts to get really powerful.
It goes from more of that tactical day-to-day to being a strategic partner, right? Where you're sort of advising them. I think all technology vendors want to do the same thing as well when they're working with their customers. They don't want to just be solving X, Y, and Z problem. We want to be proactive about decision making and how you're thinking about your business. So totally understand that.
Well, in this episode, I just feel we covered so many insights, and this is phenomenal, Jamie, for just for retailers and the LSP leaders just to listen in. We cover the market outlook for LSPs. We talked about technology integration, even scaling last mile. But I think it got really, really intriguing when we dove into AI and the impact of AI leading into the business over the next couple of years. And in the end of the day, data is the foundation for everything. You got your data right, and you bring the right data set together, and that becomes a product on its own. So as we come to the end of these episodes, I'd love for you just to give our listeners, retail and LSP leaders that listening to this episode, two advices. One, why last mile became so important, and why they should treat it really as an important growth engine for them. But then what is this one thing that you can leave everyone with, that if they do that, they will improve their last mile performance, even by 1 point, because 1 point of improvement at scale worth millions of dollars to their EBITDA.
Yeah, I think why it's become so important, like that's the last reflection of you as a service provider or as a vendor that you leave with your customer, right? Like if you go to a party and the food's bad, like you don't remember that the music was great. You're just like, man, that food was not good, right? Like it's the last image you have of that experience, and it's the last touch point. So it's got to be good, right? And advice on, where to take it, like the last mile is not like, it's not a operational or a transportation problem to solve anymore. Like we can all find people to fill the holes in our supply chain in terms of like vendors to move the freight. Like you've got to start thinking about last mile as a data problem. So what are the outcomes that you are expecting? Are you in a position within your organization where you have the data to solve to that and to make decisions? Because if you have some of it and you're making decisions on data that's only 50% right, you're probably not making very good decisions. So the biggest thing, especially as people are, I'm sure, getting pressure to start enabling their business with AI, like, you really got to go back to square one and lay that first brick, on the data and standardization side before you can think about doing anything at scale.
Yeah, this is such a great way to summarize it, because in the end of the day, the last mile is becoming about solving business problems, business outcome, financial outcomes, but then the foundation of that is your data. You got those two right, and you have the North Star in terms of what you want to solve, but at the same time, you also have the data right. Then technology just becomes technology, and AI and almost any other tool out there, it just becomes an enabler to bring the two together. Jamie, thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.